Okay, welcome back to those who are joining us online and in person for our panel discussion. This is something that we started to do a few years ago to give uh, the participants and attendees a chance to ask more probing questions, maybe invite the panelists to engage one another in Q&A and conversation. And so we'll spend most of the hour just informally engaging in the questions that we've heard throughout the morning, which are many. So for those who weren't here earlier or who are not tuned in earlier, we have David Scott to my immediate right. From UVU, David Noyce from the Salt Lake Tribune, Joel Campbell from BYU Hawaii most recently, and Kristin Peterson from Boston College. So I will invite each of them to spend 3 or 4 minutes recapping their presentation from earlier. And once we get done with that, then we'll ask them if they have questions for each other, and then we'll open it up for broader discussion. So we'll start with David, and I'll just hand you the mic, and I'll get another mic as well.
My name's David Scott, and I do research on religion, media, and popular culture, and the editor of the Journal of Media and Religion. And I have been, for most of my career, looking at media representations of religion as sort of cultural barometers, something that reflects and reinforces cultural norms and values, and how that works its way into the treatment of religion. So, what I spoke about today was the shift in our culture since World War II away from trust toward institutions and religious institutions themselves toward emphasis more on individual rights and individual belief systems and journeys, and how that impacts the way journalism and stories about religion are often portrayed in news and news magazines. And so my presentation looked at a decade of Newsweek and Time magazine discourse about religion and religious events and controversies, and showed ways in which when religion is covered as an institution, the stories tend to emphasize conflict or danger or risk or corruption. But when the stories are about personal belief systems, personal religiosity that is not affiliated with a particular denomination or religious tradition, those stories tend to be more positive and oftentimes feature women as symbols or representatives of personal spirituality and faith.
Thanks, Dave. I'm David Noyce. I'm a senior managing editor at the Salt Lake Tribune, where I've worked for 42 years, starting next month. Um, I have overseen all kinds of aspects of the Tribune's coverage, from local government environment to politics, for the last almost 20 years, oversee the faith coverage at the Salt Lake Tribune, which is very robust, actually, given the fact that Utah hosts the world headquarters of a major world religion. Um, uh, I've spent most of my time today talking about our creation of a Mormonland podcast, which has been running since September of 2017. What the goals of that podcast are and were, and how we cover this thing called Mormonism at the in the basically the headquarters of its faith, and all aspects from the culture to the history to politics to um, all kinds of different aspects, and that's uh, been a treat for my usual co-host, Peggy Fletcher Stack. She is a world-class religion reporter, actually. She is a co-founder of the International Association of Religion Journalists. I've learned a lot from her. Hopefully, she's learned a little bit from me. Um, but we were kind of dragged into podcasting, not full fans, because we were very comfortable with writing and editing, less comfortable with podcasting and broadcasting. But we have grown to love it, mainly because we love talking with our guests, learning what they have to say, and giving them a chance to speak a little bit more unfiltered about what they think on these different issues.
Hello, my name is Joel Campbell. I'm a visiting associate professor at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. My background is kind of in two divisions. My first half of my career was spent in the newsroom, mostly at the Deseret News in Salt Lake, but also in a few other places. I have, for a time, wrote a column about the First Amendment and open government for the Tribune and written for other places. And I went to graduate school at Ohio State, got my master's degree, and that kind of changed my trajectory. I came back and was a reporter for a little bit, but ended up in academia, teaching students, teaching future journalists and communicators. And my emphasis over time has been media law. I'm very interested in, still am today, but have other places in freedom of information law. Here in our state of Utah, I've been very active with leaders like the Tribune and the Deseret News and KSL at the legislature, trying to keep our records and meetings and government processes open. I guess I would say I dabble in Latter-day Saint history and media and ethics. Have taught a media ethics class, and then my favorite class to teach is media and religion, and it's been a wonderful time. Uh, so my research has looked at the right after the first Mitt Romney campaign. A colleague and I, Sherry Baker, looked in detail at the coverage, particularly national media coverage, framing, and other things there. More recently, I've dabbled in history, looked at the famous writer who would probably be considered the muse of Mark Twain, Artemus Ward, and his early traveling show about the about Mormons throughout the country. He eventually took it to England, and in Piccadilly Circus had this wonderful traveling show about the Mormons, which was it's just hilarious. But I talked about how that even to this day, he is cited by British culture as kind of the source for early Mormonism and culture. And my most recent paper that I'm working on, and David, I hope will accept it sometime, is looking at an early church leader named B.H. Roberts, became church historian. He was the first member of Congress for the new state of Utah when it was created, and he ran headlong into the publisher, media magnate William Randolph Hearst. And I make the case in my paper that William Randolph Hearst basically kept B.H. Roberts from taking his seat in Congress. It's a fascinating story. So thank you. And my presentation today was about ethics, uh, taking anecdotes and research and codes of ethics and trying to come up with maybe something that's a little bit more permanent that could be shared with journalists, but more broadly, I hope it can be developed into a code of ethics for communicators, pop culture, or whatever it might be about standards for thinking about ways that religion is portrayed or covered. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Kristin Peterson. I'm coming from Boston College. I didn't really give background on the school, so I guess I will now, because I'm learning a lot about the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'll say the full name. So I'll give you a little history of the Catholic tradition. So our university is a Jesuit Catholic institution. So if you remember Pope Francis, he was Jesuit. So it's kind of like a flavor of Catholicism. It's not really a branch, it's an order. And so there's priests within that order. Um, but anyway, but there's a big focus on education. That's key. So Georgetown, I'm sure you've heard of Georgetown, obviously. Boston College is another Fordham. And we have a big focus on reflection and, just being more, kind of there's this idea of examining your day and thinking back on things that happened during your day and kind of being always present to the way that God is working in your life. So anyway, I'll give a little background since I feel like we've been getting a lot of different history of religion. Um, And I think that's also key for why I am in the position I'm in, because there's a focus in Catholic universities on religion, obviously. So I was hired to teach courses related to religion and media, which is what I study. So that's great. Um, and I've been there for 8 years now. And what I've talked about today was a bit about my previous research, which looks at um, how individuals, particularly within the evangelical community and the Muslim American community, have who've been marginalized for various reasons based on their gender, their sexuality, their race, have used digital media spaces as spaces to speak back to the way that they've been misrepresented or the way that they've been shamed within religious discourse. And so I looked a lot at Twitter and the textual spaces, podcasts as a space of dialogue, and then visual platforms of videos and images. And then we had a conversation and talked about where we are now in terms of the age of algorithms and AI and how we have a lot more polarization. So thinking about where are the spaces for people to do this activist work, to do these conversations when we're so polarized and we're not talking to each other. And everything is kind of about proving you're right and somebody else is wrong, rather than how can we work together to collectively solve some of these problems that we have. So yes, I'm happy to be here today and take your questions. Thanks.
Yeah, we can start with questions if anybody in the room has some questions, and if not, I'll kind of convey some. Oh, good. Look, we have hands. Yeah, please be sure to speak into the microphone because we are recording this. Thank you with your question.
Thank you guys. Sorry for coming in a little bit late. So I missed most of you guys' biographies. My main question is in the terms of discourse, whether you see and speak to your own experience of a shift of narrative where we talk about religion and mostly would you guys consider we talk about religion in either a persuasive form or an informative form? And do you think one is better qualified for discourse than the other? I know as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we often are very highly persuasive in how we talk about religion. I definitely did that in Tennessee for 2 years, so I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
How do you compare persuasive to formative?
Inform the
Informative or formative?
informative. Um, I very much consider informative to be like the act of telling someone about it, and then persuasive includes a call to action at the end. Um, I know in our basic 10-20 communications class here at UVU, we have speeches dedicated to informative and persuasive. So
Why don't we start on the end? Yeah, go ahead. We'll start with Kristin. What
Well,
are your
see,
thoughts?
I was coming from a Jesuit perspective. We talk about formative education, which is like a keyword. So I was like, oh, formative, that's interesting. Now I understand what you're saying. So the question is whether do you see religion as being presented in one way or the other in the media, would you say? Or yeah.
you could explain like which one you view is most beneficial. Sorry to be a transcript.
Yeah. In terms of the media, I feel like it's often I think people of a faith are sometimes seen as being really persuasive. Well, I guess I would say certain faiths have that kind of stereotype, and I think I would say um, the church does have that stereotype because it is seen as the missionary church, Jehovah's Witnesses as well. So yeah, I would say it often is framed that way, that you're trying to persuade, um, rather, and in some ways kind of trick people. So I went to the Temple Square and did the whole tour and was great. And they were like, "Would you like the Book of Mormon?" And I was like, "Yes, I would." And these two other ladies were very sweet, and they were like, "Oh, no, that's okay, that's okay." And I'm like, "They're not gonna like sign you up on the spot if you take the book." And I was just like, "It's okay." But um, so yeah, I think there is a stereotype of that. But for me personally, I think it seems more effective to base it on maybe like the emotions and the personal experience of faith. Because I found like when the missionary was talking, the one was talking a lot about like her own faith, and you could really tell how sincere it was for her. And I feel like that to me seems most persuasive or most effective is to have people share their own stories. Um, and rather than, here's the information and I'm going to prove it to you, or yeah. So that was my impression, but I'm maybe not an expert on this.
Were you also thinking generally about religion generally in media? So let me address that a little bit. Um, well, and this is and I'm getting my algorithms from what I'm looking at, right? So my impression is of my social media feed and the things I look at online and so on, is that journalism or social media is fairly critical of faith generally. Um, and I know that my daughter, who was working at a particular toy company in Providence, Rhode Island, felt like a very anti-Christian views in the workplace and in the way that people were presenting that so and that was felt like was prompted by some of the social media going on. Now my feed obviously has a lot of pro Latter-day Saint content just because of who I am and my algorithms are working, but I'd say that that's one of the problems I see is that a lot of people who are producing social media and perhaps even journalists at times will be more jaded, and certainly in popular culture we see that. I don't know if anybody saw the most recent thing right after the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints went to Milan and announced it was giving a big donation or donating land or whatever to the 2034 Olympics. That next on Saturday Night Live, we have the stars of Saturday Night Live that you would recognize going down the going down the slope, and there's Amy Poehler, and they're trying to convert her and get her a Book of Mormon while she's skiing in the Olympics, and so that's a typical kind of portrayal of some faiths, and Saturday Night Live, you expect people to poke fun at every faith, so something going on there.
Um, First of all, 2034, if we go back to 2002, before you guys were born, um, when Utah hosted the games, I was the hockey editor, first of all. The best 17 days of my career, I have to tell you. I went to like 5 or 6 games and women's and men's hockey because I was one of the few people on staff who knew, that too, at that space. And so, and the LDS Church for the 2002 games was very overt about not proselytizing, not doing it. Um, they 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 benefit because the rap going on was going to be the Mormon Games.
Olympics.
Yeah, the Mormon Olympics, Mormon Games, Mormon Olympics. There certainly are some Mormon Games played, but it wasn't that at all for that. And Gordon B. Hinckley at the time was very emphatic about that. He wanted to be very welcoming to the world, and I think the LDS Church gained so much by taking that approach. It was better than any kind of persuasive argument they could have made. The same thing happened with the Book of Mormon musical originally. When it first came out, I've seen it twice in Chicago and once in Salt Lake. Um, and they took out ads in the playbill saying, you've seen the musical, now read the book of reading the Book of Mormon. That also was very effective. It, they haven't taken that approach so much of late, but I think they will again on the world stage. They've already said that that's what they would do in 2034, but time still needs to pass. Working for the Salt Lake Tribune, which is independent, of course, and I work on the news side, of course, so we're very much in the more informative place. But there's a place for persuasion. We have a very active opinion page. Um, and the persuasion that happens there, and I'm not over that, there's a strict firewall on that. I don't get involved in that. Is more persuasive as to public policy things that might also come from a religious bent, more than this church is right on this theological point or wrong on this theological point.
So the class I teach, Mormons, Media, and Popular Culture. I work at a state university, which means I am governed by the First Amendment, and part of the First Amendment has to do with the separation of church and state. So, whatever my religious views may or may not be, as a professional and as a scholar and as an employee of the state, right, I am not here to either endorse any particular faith tradition, nor to challenge its truth claims, right? Because every religion, again, has truth claims that to outsiders may appear unusual or strange, or even dangerous, right? Sometimes, but which cannot be proven one way or the other. So I think, as you know, as a scholar, it is our responsibility to give to share information about religion as a discipline. For me, I kind of hold on to the notion of religion as a social construction, that religious beliefs are based primarily on where we're born and our mother's beliefs primarily. If you look at the research, and and those things are reinforced through our experiences, right? And some people have experiences that lead them to leave. Some people have experiences that lead them to become very devout. Some people have experiences that lead them to become meh, right? We all have different experiences, and again, those are all part of our kind of place in that fabric of that construction of identity and meaning. And so for me, it's not about truth claims. It's about understanding varied traditions and beliefs and people at their level, and respecting that, because I personally believe religion is primarily socially constructed, because I don't believe anyone in this room has met a deity. Therefore, our beliefs about that deity are based on conversations and interactions with the people we grew up with and associate with. So because of that, I am not in a position to judge other people's religious beliefs either, because those beliefs are based on their experience and their livelihood. And so I strive to be respectful, but at the same time not to promote a particular religious ideology in my work. Which means I get, on my social media feed, I keep getting videos by like Chris Hitchens and atheists, which it's like I'm not out to go after anybody either, but that's what apparently shows up on my algorithm, because I'm not looking for devotional material when I'm doing my research.
This question is for Christian specifically. You mentioned uncivil discourse in your uh, presentation. Have you is yeah? Have you noticed where it started, or where there were like things that kind of led up to it, or was it just like kind of like a slow build up and then it was just like there we noticed it?
Well, I think it's a slow buildup. That term comes, uncivic discourse comes from that article I cited, by Volchek and Andreevich. And I think what they're specifically looking at is like how discourse is no longer, like if you think about a civil discourse, the idea being, you come together, you have a conversation about something, like there's this problem and we're going to talk about what might be ways we could solve this problem, and we have different perspectives on it, and then we maybe come out with a solution, maybe we don't come out with a solution, but we have a civil conversation where people's views are respected and heard. um, and I think where it's shifted more to this uncivic discourse, where there's not really that end goal of like a collective common good. Because even if you have a conversation and we don't really come to a conclusion, but at least we are thinking about these bigger questions and we're respecting each other's perspectives. Whereas I think with uncivic discourse, the goal is to win the argument, to prove that you are better than the other, right? And it goes back to what you were saying, Joel, about the the different levels of the human dignity. Yeah. And I think definitely those first two you mentioned, it's like, yeah, exactly. I feel like that's so much of what we see online, is that people don't see the other as human, right? Um, and so where it comes from, I think there's different places where it comes from, but I definitely think it's from the algorithms and how the social media platforms are set up to polarize, right? They don't have to be set up that way. They could be set up in a different way, but the way they're set up, the primary ones are to keep driving you more and more what you want, so that you're not so receptive to listening to somebody from the other side and seeing that person as human, who has dignity and value. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it comes from that. I think yeah, there's all these things that are feeding in society, algorithms of platforms, but also um, political polarization. I mean, I think even just thinking of political rhetoric, so much of it is, one of the things I think is it's like fandom, right? It's like sports fandom, right? It's like your team is going to win. It's like that's not what elections are about. It's not about your team winning. It's about what are we going to do to make our society better, right? Isn't that what politicians are supposed to do? They're supposed to do things, right? Um, and and it's become, like I said, it's become like a fandom of winning, and so I think there's all these different factors that are at play, but I think it's a real concern, real problem.
I'm going to add something, and that is, so when I was in communication program journalism school way back when, we were taught the Areopagitica by John Milton, and there was this great marketplace of ideas, and the best ideas are going to float to the top. You referenced that in your thing, and that's kind of the theory we've all been working on these many years. But now algorithms and the way things are programmed just flip that on its head. The best ideas may not rise anymore and may not enhance the civic discussion. The best ideas may be shuffled to the side or forgotten altogether. So, yeah, we have a whole new world where the paradigms of the past have got to be rewritten. I think John Milton would be upset if he saw today, but that's what we're up against.
We have another question.
So on that same topic, how do you guys think we can solve this problem? I don't know.
Can I? Okay, so I have. I think that the only constitutional way to do it, because it's difficult to legislate, right? You can't tell private companies that they must carry this point of view or varied points of view, or they may not or should censor, but they are all clearly motivated by profit, right? Um, and so, which is part of why the marketplace of ideas doesn't work so well anymore, because the marketplace is controlled by only a handful of players now. And not only does the cream rise to the top, but the scum rises to the top too. I've always said that. So I think the best way to handle that would be to bring back the FTC anti-monopoly laws and break down these ownerships and fragment them the way they initially did with AT&T back in the 70s when they controlled all the phone lines. I think that's the only constitutional way to do that, is to break down and TikTok and all of these social media companies into smaller organizations, which will then allow, right, a various group of organizations then to create these platforms, and maybe that would help. I'm not sure. We tend to be tribalistic and seek information that validates our own ideas and beliefs, but I think that would be a step in the right direction.
As David was answering, my phone dropped out of my pocket. And I thought, is that symbolic? Drop your phones, okay? Maybe that's what we all need to do. If we all knew the answer to that in our media side, we'd be much more profitable if we knew how to solve that. The Salt Lake Tribune, however, is a nonprofit now. It became a nonprofit several years ago. So we serve the community. And frankly, we're all kind of adjusting to that mission at the Tribune. Um, we think, is this a story? Is that a story? That's how we think, because that's our job. And now we have to think, and we should think, is this a story, and how is this going to help our community? That doesn't mean we don't tell hard stories. We do. That's one way you can help the community. But it also means living very much by the SBJ code, of course, which is, you don't want to do harm either. You want to, treat everyone with respect, all those different things. But So I'm hoping that the community can come together and talk face to face. You know, Kristen, I think you talk about you see that starting to happen a little bit more, which means get off of your online group and go out and talk to people. In journalism, we used to call those third places. I used to send my reporters out, go to the coffee shop, go to here, go to the food court. Okay, in Utah, that's a big thing, and just talk to people. Put your damn notebook away and just talk to people. See what they're talking about. It's all off the record. You just want to get a sense of what they're talking about. And I think you have a different conversation then. I know when I get criticism, and I do get my share of criticism, when I'm able to talk to people and explain things, it's amazing the understanding that comes. But it's probably going to take getting around those algorithms and getting maybe dropping our phones.
I think you're absolutely right. I remember as a new reporter, I was assigned Davis County, and uh, and they said go out and talk to people, and I said okay. Well, so say you got to go to Sills Cafe in Layton because that's where all the news is at. You got all these old timers drinking coffee or getting their morning breakfast, and you need to go in there. It was kind of tough. It was kind of tough to
Lambs in downtown
Don
Salt Lake.
Lambs in Salt Lake, same kind of thing. Go in there and you're going to get the news. And I did, and I've got some great scoops. It was wonderful. But yeah, we need to talk more. And there's a lot of. I was on the board for a while for the KUER National Public Radio here, and we're a nonprofit public service thing. And we did talk a lot about trying to do more by getting, talking to people about, looking for the signs of and doing media literacy work and those kind of things. There is curriculum in the seventh grade, I think it is, in Utah, where we're supposed to learn media literacy. Not sure how effective it is, but helps how to find good information versus bad information. But yeah, David kind of interests me because it might be the factor of money that drives this disintegration. But I know that there are many efforts on many levels trying to help educate. But right now we're still at an interesting point where it's not all working, right?
I had a few thoughts. I I'm a first. I mean, I agree in the First Amendment. I support it. Obviously, I don't support any sort of moderation of conflict or content moderation in extreme ways, like viewpoint moderation. But I think that some of these platforms are set up intentionally to be addictive and harmful, and we know that they are. And I I don't see how that can. I think that needs to be regulated in some way. I think the government, should have some way of regulating these platforms that they cannot be feeding harmful content to people day in and day out. And we know that. I go on. There's countless studies now. We know this is very harmful for young people, right? For everybody. So I think there should be something around that. I think the companies have just gone on forever and ever being like, oh, well, Section 230, we don't have to worry about anything. It's like, yeah, but it's so harmful. They're making so much money. So I think there's that. I do feel like there needs to be some sort of regulation, particularly of the way that the platforms are set up intentionally to keep you on them. Um, but then I also think, well, I kind of want to push it towards you. I mean, what are things that you think can be done too? Because it's not just us. Um, and I think there, the other thing, and I talked about it in the presentation a lot, is this idea of pleasure, right? We all get, we know we do, right? We all get pleasure from looking at these platforms, right? There's some sort of dopamine hit that we get. But we have to think about, and maybe I'm getting a little too spiritual or whatever, is that really deep, like significant enjoyment and pleasure, or is it it's just this little blip, right? So how can we resist that and find in our lives these other spaces where we can really connect with people, really feel, share community and engagement with people. So even just simple things like, I don't know if taking buses here or public transit is a big thing, but but things, places where you are, where you're like, maybe I don't need to be listening to music. Maybe I don't need to be looking at my phone. Maybe I'm just gonna be and look people in the eye and smile at people and, you know, these are small things, but I feel like there's things that we can do to resist this, right? And to resist the way that we've so become so dependent and so enmeshed in these platforms and let them kind of take us for a ride. So I feel like I'm talking about lots of different things, but it's a big question that we're really grappling with right now. Um, and but I think again, it's like you all are part of this too. It's not just us. We're all working together.
Sorry to go off on whatever we were just talking about. I have a question for David Noyce. Specifically in your presentation, you had a question from a lady who sat right here talking about like what was one of your biggest criticisms and how did you deal with that, right? And you had answered with talking about something I believe it was on your Mormonland podcast, how you had an interview with someone that brought up the Gaza and Israeli thing. My question is regarding like super current events like that, how do you approach something that's more current instead of when you're talking about things more like that happened in the past that deals with like the core of religion? When you approach something in more of a current, more modern times, are you more pointed? Like, are you more questionative? Do you push back more? Do you get more exact wording? Like, how do you kind of balance? Because I assume you have like a sort of responsibility if you're present, if you're like delivering this news to like people who are listening to you. So how do you kind of like balance all that?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I think the one I referred to also was because we waded into something that was so hot, so early, and we are so unexpert in it. How else to put it. But we do want to be topical, which means, yes, we want to ask, we put parameters on. We don't want this to be gotcha questioning of our guests, but we want to make sure we ask questions that need to be asked. Okay, so you're asking how to balance it. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we may succeed, frankly. And it's not a science either. We do want to make sure that we're representing, we're asking, we want the guest to be able to fairly represent views of some topical thing that's happened. I'll give you an example. The LDS Church came out last year, 2025 or 2024, 2025, I believe, with new guidelines on transgender within like chapels and things like that. It became quite controversial. Not as controversial as their exclusion policy from November of 2019, but very controversial nonetheless. No, 2015, I think. But so we had some guests on, transgender guests on. And so we wanted to get this person's view, their view of what transpired and how they saw them. In that instance, I don't think we necessarily needed to say, "Oh, come on, certainly you can't use the same restroom or whatever," and because that's part of the church's policy essentially that they ask people to do. So in that case, we didn't really feel like we needed to balance. It's sort of like, do you need to ask a tobacco company, well, come on, defend cigarette smoking, how it's good for your health. You know, we don't do that anymore. So we don't have to necessarily balance that. But the other part can be very difficult. Um, when we're talking about people's personal stories, their personal beliefs, we don't really feel a great need to press them on their personal beliefs. But an institution, we can try to ask about that. For instance, a lot's been talked about, and it came up in David Scott's presentation about churches and money and religion. And the LDS Church is very wealthy. There's no other way around it. It's 17.5, million members, and they have a publicly reported rainy day fund that's more than $60 billion. So just a lot of money. So there's some hard questions that can be asked about that. Is this appropriate? Should the church be more transparent in its finances? so in that case, we do press, and that's fair game. We wished we could actually get the people who actually handle the church's money on to our podcast to actually ask some of those questions. That may be one reason they don't come on, of course, because we have to ask that. I don't know if that answers your question or if I just successfully dodged my way around.
No, you're good. I can see what you're saying. You're more saying that you're not going to attack obviously like your guests what they're saying to you. You're not going to try to pick apart like what their belief or their opinion is. You're saying you're going to generalize and point it more towards the bigger thing that everyone kind of sees is what you're saying.
If it has to be.
Okay.
Yes, if it has to be as we see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot of conversations about like religious experience just in my day-to-day life. But it's usually with people that experienced religion in a very similar way that I did, or just have a lot of the same opinions. So those conversations can feel really fun, and I feel like we're really like making a lot of connections, and it feels great, and I feel really smart, and like I know what I'm talking about. But then when it comes to talking to people that think differently than me, I lose a lot of that confidence. I start feeling probably a lot of imposter syndrome because I do feel like I educate myself well, but talking to people who think differently, I lose my confidence in what I know. And so I want to be able to foster those conversations that are actually productive rather than just like affirming pre-existing beliefs between similar people. But I don't always know how to approach that in a productive way. So
Well, I'm going to take it from a journalist perspective because I walked into lots of situations. I had an opportunity to write several religion articles as a journalist, and like I think during my presentation I mentioned, I did a long feature story on a faith closely that shared 13 years of history, but they made it very apparent that hey, we only shared 13 years of history with the Community of Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So instead of, and I went in assuming I was wrong. I went in assuming some things about our shared beliefs, which were not true. And I started just listening and asking questions. That's when I learned a lot about that. I just said, well, what do you think about this idea? And listen. To me, that's probably the best thing to do if you don't know. And it's not go in assuming anything, but go in just asking questions and ask a lot of questions. And I found that people were just more than happy to tell me all the answers that I needed, and it was a really great experience for me. That's from a journalist perspective.
From a personal perspective, uh, I think if I am not the same person I was a decade ago, and that person was not the same person he was a decade before that, and I think that's the process of learning and experiencing other perspectives. And oftentimes, I think it's not unusual to be, especially things we hold very personally and powerfully, like religion or politics. It's not unusual to feel some apprehension about hearing other points of view because we fear that perhaps those other points of view might challenge our existing ways of seeing. But what I have learned is that my wife teaches international students, and so I started out in the UK. I'm from England originally, and went to Catholic school in England, and then came to Utah and was surrounded by all my Latter-day Saint friends, and and so I've had to learn that everybody, people all come from different backgrounds and have different ways of seeing and understanding. Um, and the most important thing I've felt I can do is break bread with people from different traditions. If the best way, other than your weird uncle that visits on once a year on Thanksgiving, the best way to really learn and understand other traditions and other ways of seeing and thinking is to sit down and break bread and have food with people and get to know them a lot better. My wife works with a Islamic organization that do a lot of outreach to help the poor here in Salt Lake City and in Utah Valley, that do a lot to present Islam as in a positive light so that people can quit looking at them and assuming they're all terrorists, right? And so uh, us getting to know them and breaking bread with them and celebrating Ramadan dinners with them on occasion, us attending Seders with our Jewish friends, attending christenings for our Lutheran and Catholic friends, going to Latter-day Saint churches when they bless their children. All of those things have enriched my life and have not undermined my own beliefs. They've given me more ways of seeing and understanding, and again, they've changed me. But I don't see that as a threat anymore.
Good question. With how media tends to affect how we see religion, how does pop media affect how we interact with other religions versus just people who make up the religion and have different ways of interacting with the religion as they do?
Could you repeat the first part of the question? I'm not sure I caught that.
With how media, uh, popular media, or how news depicts religion, like how does that affect how we interact with religion versus people who within the religion who are very different and very diverse interact with that religion and outsiders also?
So in terms of how the news, right, present
Yeah.
religion or pop culture
How
presents
that
religion, how
affects.
does that impact the way we interact with people, faith?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work I've done on Muslim Americans looks at that because if you look at religious communities like that that are minorities within the US, and also there's a lot of um, association with violence and war that in the media. So it has a significant effect, I think, on people. There's a really powerful documentary that was done based on a book called Real Bad Arabs, and it's real REEL, like film reel. Again, it's kind of dating us now, but film used to be on reels. Anyway, this was the life's work of this man named Professor Jack Shaheen. And he basically went from 1920 to when he wrote the book in 2000, and he looked at every time an Arab was portrayed in film, which is often overlapped with Islam, right? And and what it was like. Was it good, bad, whatever? And he documents it. And this book, it's like incredible to see the extensive history of dehumanization of Arabs and Muslims. And he has a YouTube that you can see the documentary on YouTube as well. And he makes the argument in the book and the film that you know if you have this 100-year history of dehumanizing people, it's not surprising that when the government says we're going to go to war, that people would be in support of that because it's like, well, we don't really see those people as humans because we've seen so many popular portrayals of them as not human, right? And as evil and terrorists. And I think film in particular and TV shows are really more impactful because they're emotional. You know, you really get tied into the story and the characters. And so, I mean, news media as well, but I think particular film. So that's one example that I would give. But I think also like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has been really misrepresented in media for a long time as on one end is a little strange, a little secretive, but on the other end is as really in a negative light of like a really powerful, money hungry, influential religion. But similar rhetoric was told about the Catholic Church, right? So um, these things get reinforced. But yeah, I think it has a huge effect because if you don't know somebody who is part of that religious community, how are you going to make sense of that when they say, "Oh, we're going in to bomb this country," or um, and whether you're going to think that's a good thing or a bad thing. And the example of the killing that happened in North Carolina, the man was who committed the murder. He had a very anti-religious rhetoric all over his social media, and so you can think about how the media may have influenced those opinions as well in his life. So
I was just going to say, and I'm sure that David Scott, you do the same thing in your class, but I often we will show clips and we have, content that's critical of those clips from different popular culture, from movies, those kinds of things. I also do try to have my students try to find some positive portrayals, or at least some of the portrayals, but on a personal level. So when we go do visits with some of the different religious groups or whatever that we meet, particularly if we have a one-on-one session with a imam or a pastor or something like that, I'll often ask the question, well, how do you feel that the media or the news or the media in the country misportrays you? And they will answer and tell you very honestly the ways they feel that they are misrepresented. And it's speaking of, we just did a conference in Hawaii, and I had Professor Daniel Asara from the Pontifical Church Communication of the Catholic Church. He runs many priests and lay people have to go through there. And I visited there a few years ago, and we were talking about, well, how about portrayals of the Catholic Church? And he hands me this whole journal, Church Communication Journal. It's all about the Da Vinci Code. So it had like 7 articles about the Da Vinci Code. So, you have to dig a little deep, but you can usually find a really interesting enclave and conclave. Yes, yes, and things like that. So, and it might be helpful to ask a Roman Catholic friend, did you see this and what did you think of it? Or find critique online. There's usually a lot of critique in those areas too.
I just want to add, and I think this gets to your question. If you look at the Pew Research has this thermometer reading about people's friendliness or positive attitudes towards people of faith, and the bottom 3 on the list are atheists, Latter-day Saints, and Muslims. And which is remarkable. It's like, what did these people ever do to you? But the atheist didn't even knock on your door. But but that's true. That is a good point. But when people who have they followed up with people who had positive attitudes about Latter-day Saints and Muslims and so on, and to look for a common variable about what led to those positive feelings, and it was that they knew somebody from that tradition. If you know people, then you know they're real people and they're just like you. And at that point, right, the all the stuff from the media slips away, and you can actually get to know people and understand them for who they are.
Yeah, that was a good point. I wanted to also say, even though there's like misrepresentations of the Catholic Church in the media, it's, very common. There's so many Catholics in the US, so people generally don't think that all Catholics are like the Da Vinci Code guy that's like hitting himself in the back, right? But I think that's a good point because it's a minority religion. There is more misconceptions because people don't know somebody, and I think that's the main thing. Yeah.
Does anybody want to add anything before we close the meeting? Well, thank you, everybody. Please take a pizza with you on the way out. And take it to take a whole, that's what I'm saying. Take a pizza with you, not a slice, and enjoy it. Thank you for coming. Please give all our participants a hand for their time and for sharing with us. Thank you.